to get everyone to come on in and find a seat. Our last session is going to be a roundtable, and this roundtable consists of two people that are, or two experts that are in favor of Common Core and support Common Core standards in Oklahoma, and then we have two experts that are actually opposed to Common Core. So this is going to give us a great opportunity as you come up and ask the questions that are important to you to be able to hear both sides of the issue. So if you have questions about it, start getting them together, because I have a feeling that the lines are going to be long, and the same rules are going to apply. They're going to open with a five-minute statement, and then we're going to start taking questions from the audience. We ask that your questions be short as possible, and make sure you have a question, because it's important. And let's keep everybody's time in mind, because we want to get as many questions and answers in as we possibly can. So I'm going to. You need to turn that? Yes, I can imagine. See, he stole my fan already. Okay, yeah, I hear you. That little one didn't do anything for you, did it? Okay, we're going to start with Brian Hunt. He has experience from school board leadership, commercial real estate sales to economic development, ranging from workforce development to business recruitment. As president of the Tulsa School Board in 2011, he oversaw Project Schoolhouse, a school consolidation and efficiency initiative. He embraced the Teacher Leader Effectiveness Initiative to develop a teacher leader value-add evaluation system focused on student growth, which has become the state of Oklahoma's preferred evaluation model. This is Brian Hunt.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you for that introduction. Just a couple of other points. I'm the executive director of Stand for Children. We're an education advocacy group. We're in 10 other states. We just launched this year in Oklahoma. I'm the executive director. I've got a government affairs director and a marketing and communications person in Oklahoma City as well. And really excited to be here and be focusing on education advocacy. As you guys know, based on the size of this audience, education is a very important topic to Oklahomans. We have always been willing to reinvest in ourselves, and we've had spirited discussions over the years about where we are on standards and what we expect from our kids. Probably the most interesting aspect of this is I come from a perspective of having been a native Tulsan. I went to Tulsa Edison, class of '86, and then had the opportunity to stay here and raise my family, running what is now the Partners in Education program that's been very successful with both the faith-based community and the business community adopting schools. That's what we actually referred to it as in the early 90s, as the Adopt a School program. That was really where I kind of got my passion for education, because in a setting like that, you have the opportunity to kind of get out of your bubble and really see West Tulsa and North Tulsa and East Tulsa and understand some of the inequities as you're walking down the classrooms and visiting with principals and school leaders as to how different a school system is like Tulsa Public, because it's so big. Serving on the Tulsa School Board was certainly a labor of love. It was 4 years that felt like it was closer to 12 years. But Project Schoolhouse is something that I was very excited about. And for those of you that are familiar with it, one of the high points, of course, is Will Rogers High School, where kids now have the opportunity to earn an associate's degree from Tulsa Community College in addition to going to their high school at Will Rogers. But the most important thing, and the thing that I'm the most proud of, is I've got 3 kids in Tulsa Public Schools. Hayden is a sophomore at Tulsa Edison. Sally is in Carver Middle School, and Susan, my youngest, is 4th grade at Zero International. So I want to talk to you today, not just as the executive director of Stand for Children Oklahoma, but really as a parent, and talk about the Common Core state standards. You know, Oklahoma's voluntary decision in 2010 to adopt these standards was really part of a conversation we were having among parents, educators, and community leaders that we simply weren't measuring up with our peers across the nation. I believe personally as a parent that Common Core standards are important because they really give our students what they need to be ready for in terms of either going to college or being career ready and post-secondary training, which is so important in today's environment. It is not the era of post-World War II where you can still find a good job simply being a high school graduate. They also, the standards, provide, I believe, teachers with a clear and consistent roadmap on how they can prepare their lesson plans, primarily, of course, in Oklahoma related to English, which is now language arts, as well as math. You know, the sad fact is that in Oklahoma, about 40% of our high school seniors that go to college aren't ready. They have to take remedial classes. And if you can imagine attending college and having to take a class that is worth 0 credit because you didn't get what you should have in high school, that's a big burden on families. That should not be happening. We should have high standards for the high school seniors that we produce, both in Tulsa Public Schools as well as across the state. The other aspect of that is when you have to take remedial classes, the likelihood of you graduating with a 4-year degree becomes less and less because they get frustrated. It kicks them into what can sometimes be a 5th or a 6th year of college tuition. You know, the other aspect of Common Core that a lot of people don't realize, especially in a state like Oklahoma, is we do have 4 military bases. And when you take the time to visit with people in Altus, Enid, Lawton with Fort Sill, and Tinker, they will tell you what it's like as a military family to move among states and to not have consistency. We've got the story of a young man that moved his child from Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri to Vance Air Force Base, and where he was in terms of, you know, his 3rd or 4th grade child, the standards were not the same.
30 seconds.
He was very disappointed. Finally, Common Core, I believe, works. We've seen great gains in the state of Kentucky, which has similar experiences and demographics to Oklahoma. And I guess I want to emphasize to you, this is not something that I believe is coming down from the federal government. I believe if you take the time to understand real-life examples, you will understand this. So my son, who's in 10th grade at Edison, has a summer reading list, and it includes these instructions from his sophomore English teachers. After you've read a fiction and a nonfiction book, of which they've got the list of books available, you will develop a 5-paragraph essay with a central idea and a thesis statement. You will have fully developed bodies of paragraphs. You will have examples of characters and traits from the characters in the book of what it took for those characters to be successful and what you need to be successful for in life. Sincerely, your sophomore English teachers. Great teachers are already doing great things in terms of curriculum. And what we're talking about is raising standards and expecting more for our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to introduce to you Dr. Everett Piper in his fan club. He has served as the president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University in Bartlesville, Oklahoma since August 2002. He has served as an adjunct scholar of the Oklahoma Council for Public Affairs and is a current member of the Council for National Policy. He has written for the Tulsa World, Examiner Enterprise, Tulsa's Community Spirit, Chuck Colson's Breakpoint magazine, and is the author of 2 books. Dr. Piper is featured weekly on KFAQ's Pat Campbell Show in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please welcome Dr. Everett Piper.
Two or 3 years ago, I wrote a book, and I chose the title, Why I'm a Liberal and Other Conservative Ideas. Why I'm a Liberal, in quotation marks, and Other Conservative Ideas. And in that book, I'm making this argument. The classical liberal arts academy was founded in 1090 AD in Oxford to educate a free man, a free culture, and a free society. liberal, liberty, liberation, freedom. My issue with Common Core is I'm not all that fond of what's common. I would rather be free. I would rather have liberty. I would rather decide what's exceptional and not dumb down the curriculum for my kids or myself or my church or my culture or my country to what someone else decides is common. As an academic with over 30 years of experience in the academy, I believe in academic freedom. I believe that truth will win the day. I don't care what your opinion is, and I'm not going to give you a diploma in it. I want you to learn something. I want you to learn what's true, and I'm going to hire good faculty that understand how to teach that. And if they don't teach 2 + 2 is 4, then I will fire them, and I will find somebody who understands that the answer is 4. I don't need somebody else to tell me how to do that. Furthermore, Einstein was fond of saying that the definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Why in the world would we hand over a broken body, diseased and dying, to the very industry that caused its disease in the first place? For over 50 years, we have had an educational establishment that has worshipped at the altar of Dawkins and Derrida and Darwin and Dewey. I do not think the solution is to give the same establishment authority to solve the problem. I agree, our educational establishment is a mess. I agree, our students are not learning what they should learn. But I'm not going to give the responsibility for the cure for cancer to the tobacco industry. They caused the problem in the first place. Good education, real education, true education is not about what's common. It's about what's exceptional. It's about what's true. And my last point before I sit down the mic on this 5-minute intro is, who's deciding this stuff? Is it you? Is it your superintendent? Is it your teacher? My institution is recognized nationally as a top-tier regional best, and it has been for 11 consecutive years by U.S. News and World Report and Forbes.com, and my faculty are featured in the past 3 consecutive years on CBS News as being the best faculty in the nation, beating Harvard, Dartmouth, Yale, and Princeton and everybody else when it comes to student review and satisfaction. I'm telling you right now, I do not dictate what is common to my faculty. They understand that as scholars, they're in charge, and they are to teach the students what's right. That's good education.
Our next panelist I'd like to introduce you to is Speaker Chris Benge. He's a native of Tulsa and currently lives in Berry Hill. He was first educated, no, he wasn't first educated, he was first elected to the State House of Representatives in 1998, focusing on transportation funding, energy security, pension reform, and creating a climate that allows businesses to grow by keeping government out of the way. Chris worked to keep the OSU Medical Center open in Tulsa. While in the House, he served 3 years as the chairman of Appropriations and Budget Committee and 3 years as Speaker of the House. He was part of the Republican caucus that gained the majority in the State House in 2004. And in 2010, Chris served as Mayor Dewey Bartlett's administration. He then moved to the Tulsa Regional Chamber to head the Government Affairs Division. Please join me in welcoming Speaker Chris Benge.
Thank you, and Rhonda, thank you for the invitation. Rhonda and I have gotten to know each other over the last year and have sat down at breakfast and coffee, and I think both of us have been able to share ideas and what we believe in, and we've had some pretty good discussions and even debates in some ways. And so, Rhonda, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks to thank you to the 912 organization for putting this on. Want to add a little bit about my background, not because I want to talk about me, but I want you to know at least a little bit about my perspective from maybe a personal standpoint. I have children in the public schools, or I have a son who's graduated from Berry Hill High School. I have a daughter who will be a junior this year in Berry Hill. I believe that the state ought to govern. I think that state rights is a real issue, and whenever the states can, they ought to be able to. I think they're the incubators for public policy, and I think that we ought to use state experience and our governors and those governments, because they're closer to the people, to develop policy. But I also have concerns about federal overreach, which I think, and I know a lot of you have some of those same concerns. So you might ask, well, why are you here in support of Common Core? And so I hope to be able to share some of those thoughts with you in our discussion today. As Rhonda mentioned, I ran for the legislature in 1998 in the House of Representatives and was elected then. During that time, I don't know if many of you were following politics at the time, but Governor Keating at the time was talking about raising standards in the public schools. And he was talking about a 4x4 program at the time, which was 4 years of math, science, social studies, and English. And there was a lot of pushback from the education establishment at the time. And we continued, and I say we, policymakers at the time continued to push for higher standards in our public schools, because we felt like that they were lacking. We felt like that we were at a competitive disadvantage overall, and that we needed to provide our students an opportunity to succeed in the workforce. I have always had a fundamental belief that if you challenge children, they'll rise to that challenge, and that we ought to be setting the bar high for their academic performance. During my service in the state, we worked on charter school bills. We worked on bills to try to offer performance pay for teachers, to try to break the teacher tenure laws that were protecting low-performing teachers. We tried to be respectful, and I think I was always respectful and supportive of private school options as well as homeschool options. To me, a good education system was one that recognizes that students learn in different environments. Some students do well in private schools, some in home schools, but no matter what our systems of education are going to be, I don't think we can ever turn our back on the fact that we need public education. And so I consider myself a supporter of public education. I do recognize that there are some issues that need to be addressed. But I think we need to try to address those, because we're always going to need public education. Not all of our kids have an opportunity to go to a private school, or have the parents that have the ability to school them at home. From the business community standpoint, education is always a major factor that we hear brought to our attention when we're trying to recruit business, or when we're trying to grow business. It is a fundamental piece of being able to provide jobs and opportunity for all of our citizens. And so we constantly, when we're on the front lines talking to business from the chamber standpoint, they want to know about our education system, and they want to know about the performance of our students. And lately, we've been hearing a lot from our businesses here in the region that they are having a difficult time hiring and finding employees that have the skills to meet the needs that they have for this current work environment. So because of that, we are supportive of higher standards and raising the bar, and we believe that the Common Core standards offer that. Some of the things about Common Core, and I think Brian mentioned some. One of those, it offers clarity and consistency. It offers high academic demands and the ability to compare ourselves with other states. Whether we like it or not, when we're trying to compete for jobs, we have to show how we compare against other states. We have to show that Oklahoma is better than other states, because that's how we attract business. That's how we grow our businesses and grow jobs in the state, which I think are important to everyone. Some of the things that I've seen and just kind of trying to read about different areas of Common Core. There's an attempt to eliminate multiple choice tests, for example. Something that I feel like for many years has been a disservice to our students, that whenever they do take a test, they can just mark a bubble and answer a question that way. And with the new standards, there's going to be a requirement on kids to demonstrate knowledge and demonstrate what they know and write that out. And I think that's an important component of it. Some of the states that have already tried to implement the standards, for example, and I think this is an example that I would want to bring out, that they are trying to raise the bar, trying to raise standards. In New York, for example, after they implemented some of the Common Core standards, their test scores went from 65 in math and 55 in English to 31 in both math and English. They went down. And they went down because when you implement those higher standards, it's going to challenge all of our students to try to raise to a higher level. And I think that's something that we ought to be prepared for if we end up adopting these standards, that all of our students in public schools are going to be required to meet a higher level.
30 seconds.
Did you say 30 seconds? Okay. I will, I'll wrap up my comments by also recognizing and bringing into the conversation that the National Governors Association, which is one of the associations that was involved in developing the Common Core standards a few years ago, it is a state level effort. The National Governors Association was established in 1908. It is an organization that allows all of our governors from around the United States to come together to develop policy and actually in many cases to take issue with the federal government on what they're doing. Our current governor, Mary Fallin, has just taken over the chairperson of the National Governors Association for the next year, and her platform is going to be workforce and education. She is going to bring that conversation to a national level about how we can prepare our kids for the workforce and how we can better compete in an ever-increasing international competitive market. And so I think it needs to be pointed out that governors and states individually did adopt the core standards. And at least from what I've been able to see, I've not seen the evidence that it's a top-down federal mandate. If it is out there, it is not something I've seen, but it is a state-led effort that our states and the state of Oklahoma included is going to be a part of trying to raise standards in all of our public schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Once a politician, always a politician. 30 seconds, you know. Our final not candidate, but our final. What is she? No. Our final forum participant is Ms. Jenny White. Jenny has a master's degree in biology and taught high school science after graduation. After a brief stint as an epidemiologist with Oklahoma State Health Department, she taught 7th grade science. After researching the teaching of U.S. history, her concerns about the course of public education in Oklahoma prompted her to co-found Restore Oklahoma Public Education, better known as ROPE, in 2008. She has written major research articles on the Common Core state standards and has had her research published in the American Thinker. Please join me in welcoming Jenny White.
Thank you. And if I had had wisdom, like we talked about earlier, I would have had a piece of paper here so I could jot some things down. As it is, my old memory will have to suffice. Just kind of as some background, we first learned about the Common Core state standards in 2010, but we didn't learn about them as the Common Core state standards. We learned about them through a grant called Race to the Top. And Race to the Top was a federal initiative that provided money to states if they would do one of 4 things, and preferably all 4 education reforms together. And so the more education reforms that we did, that again was provided by the federal government through the grants. So the federal government saying, here's your money if you will do these 4 things that we're asking you to do. We attempted to do all 4 of them in state law in 2010. And so pretty much all of the reforms that we have from the Race to the Top are in state law without us ever getting any money for that. But it was voluntary that we did sign up to get the money. I think it's also important to remember, too, a couple of things about the Common Core that really I hope we get a lot of questions on. And that is, are you able to articulate wisdom through a test? I mean, if I am to give you any kind of a test, even a computer test, are you able to prove to me how wise you are through that test? And if you're not, and we're more interested in just what you can regurgitate to me on a test, I think then we need to decide what really we're going for in the end here. I thought it was very telling that Jack Heron, for those of you who were here this morning, held up a Tulsa World article that he had, and he read about in this Tulsa World article about how education was failing in Oklahoma and how we really had to do something about education in Oklahoma because it was failing. And then, of course, after he had read all of that, he revealed that that was from 1950. So we have, I think anybody who wants to make an issue out of education can certainly find an issue to make out of education, but is it always the right issue to make? So, for example, I might say, we've always had standards in recent history in Oklahoma, and the standards have been produced by the State Department of Education. Actually, one time when I was a science teacher at Deer Creek, we were at the State Department of Education actually asked our science department to contribute to some of those standards, and we did so because our particular school at that time was very high in academic progress. So that's what we did. Well, if we had standards then at that point, and that's what we actually did have a test that we administered to public school students after the year that was to have them regurgitate to us what they got out of that year by the standards that we put forth at the state level. So why is it that we would do something different then? Well, a little law came down not very long ago called the No Child Left Behind Act, and in that, basically, schools were penalized if they were not reaching a certain level of proficiency for all students, and these were created to be grades, and then all the schools were graded on this particular number, this proficiency rating. Well, as any time when for example, even if I tell my son to take the garbage out, he's going to find the easiest route to take the garbage out that we can possibly, as we earlier discerned, he will at some points leave it simply in the driveway. But everybody is going to try to find the easiest way to do whatever it is that somebody is forcing them to do. So, did we have a problem with standards in Oklahoma, or did we have to dumb down the tests, in other words, drop the cut scores on the tests that we were giving in order to make it seem like school children in Oklahoma were doing better so that we could continue to collect our federal money? I think there's not only have we proposed that theory, but there have been a number of organizations who have as well proposed that same theory. So if that's the case, was it the standards that were a problem in the first place? If they were, I'm not really sure why the Thomas Fordham Institute would give our state standards a B+ for standards compared, nationally. Why would we need to change from a B+? And if we were going to change from a B+, we might as well go to an A, and there were several states that were given A ratings by Thomas Fordham on their rating system for the standards. So we could have picked one of the A's. As it was, Thomas Fordham gave, I think, math an A- and English a B+, so their standards didn't even quite measure up to an A. So I guess it all boils down to why exactly are we doing this. And I also want to point out here, too, that if the goal of education is to produce a citizen who is wise and who has enough wisdom and enough common sense to be able to get a job, whether they're pumping sewage or going through college to become an attorney, whatever that is, if that's the goal of education, then forcing a set of standards on that and then trying to back those standards up by a set of tests, which, by the way, if you do them on computer, one of the biggest arguments we have is that we need to be able to tell and compare states and compare schools within states on the test, and this is what these computer tests are supposed to do. Well, I will tell you that these computer tests have been lauded because of the fact that, well, they're great because if a student answers this question, then they can go to this question, or they're progressive tests. So they're not just answering this question and that's the end of it. If they answer this question, they may go to a more difficult question.
30
If they answer
seconds.
this question, they may go to a less difficult question. Well, I didn't have a whole lot of statistics, but I can tell you that you can only compare things that are the same. If the students aren't taking exactly the same test, then you can't compare those same tests. So really, what is the effort boiled down to then in the end?
Well, thank you. Excellent panel, wouldn't you agree? We're going to open the mic for anyone that has any questions regarding anything that's been touched upon here. I want to start off with one because it's something that I haven't heard addressed just yet. And one of the concerns that I hear a lot about is the P20 and the gathering of information on our students and how this all ties together. I'm just kind of wondering what your feelings are on the information gathering and where our information will be going, and is that really safe for our students and our families? Whoever wants to start out.
Sure, I've certainly recognized, and I've heard that before, the concern about privacy. With 3 kids, obviously I want their records to be confidential as well. I can't speak to any of the specifics. What I do know is that there is already a federal law in place, FERPA, related to protecting student rights. And I believe this past session, the Oklahoma legislature passed some additional language in state law that strengthens that notion that it's not simply going to be shared, but that any data that they collect will be aggregated as a result of comparing states. I personally do not believe that student privacy is really an issue at this time.
I'll address that. FERPA is a gutted law that really, unfortunately, does not protect children in any state across the nation since Arne Duncan had the FERPA laws changed in 2012. So when you're really talking about FERPA, what Arne Duncan did in 2012 was he went to the Federal Registry and he said, you know, the idea that I can't collect some of this data is chilling. I mean, I can't do this education reform without this data. So basically what they did with FERPA is they allowed schools, and you could even say the federal government for that particular argument, to collect data in 12 extra ways inside the school without parental consent at all. So at this point in time, if you are to say, well, FERPA prevents certain things from happening, you would more, unfortunately, you would be incorrect because it just simply doesn't function that way anymore. I think also, too, we were very involved with the data bill that you're discussing now. And the data bill that we had that started out was basically we just wanted parents to be able to get permission, or schools to be able to get permission for whatever data they took. And the law that ended up being passed was really not a law that is, while it helps us determine what kind of data the state is collecting, it doesn't really protect children in its current form.
Go ahead and state your name and your question, please.
My name is Sandy Garrett.
You're going to need to speak into it and a little bit louder.
My name is Sandy Garrett, and I would say that we all can remember Nancy Pelosi's famous statement, you have to pass the bill to find out what's in it. And I want to suggest to those of you who support this that at the time that you were supporting it, you probably went with the information that you had, which was basically at that time all the positive stuff, which is what they give you first. And I just want to ask you that since so much more information has come out, have you been willing to keep updated on the new information about Common Core, especially the stuff that Jenny White produces? And are you willing to keep looking at that, and if you find out at some point in time, wow, this is not exactly what we thought it was, are you willing to say, we made a mistake, we've got to get out of this?
I mean, I think I would say to your question, I mean, that's part of, I think, why we're here today. I know for myself, I came here, part of the reasons I wanted to come was to hear some of the concerns, because I know that over the next year, and especially next session, it's going to be a very intense discussion at the legislature, because I know that there are some legislators who are actively talking about repealing or backing out of the Common Core standards. So, I mean, I think I'm not advocating for that, by the way, but I'm just stating a fact. But I mean, it's all about having a conversation, and to generally the principal part of your question, I think any kind of law that passes that the society or whomever finds out information later, we should always be willing to review or discuss and consider. But I do want to add, and I didn't have time to make this point in my opening comments, but some of the things that, as I was reviewing some of the sample text, for example, that the Common Core standards are offering are things like the preamble and First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Some sample text from Killer Angels, which is a book about the Civil War, one that actually I've read. It's part of a trilogy. Grapes of Wrath, Thomas Paine's Common Sense, de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, and David McCullough's 1776. These are sample texts that have been listed as recommendations that students read in the new Common Core standards if they're adopted. I would also want to be sure and make the point that the standards are being recommended on what students ought to know. It's still up to the local states, the local school districts, the teacher in the classroom as to how to actually execute that and what curriculum to use. The football analogy I heard recently used was that it's like you tell your coaches and your players that you want to score a touchdown, you want to get first downs. It's up to it's up to the players to figure out and execute the playbook, figure out what the plays are going to be able to score those touchdowns.
Dr. Piper?
Just a real quick response or a comment with regard to Sandy's question. Open-mindedness, ongoing conversation. It was interesting when I was on OETA a couple weeks ago with Jenny and a couple other individuals that were pro-Common Core. At the end of the conversation, at the end of the TV program, I believe her name was Klein, Ann Klein. I believe she's superintendent of Stillwater School System. In frustration, she said, the decision has been made and the conversation is closed. In other words, we're not going to talk about this anymore. And again, I'm going to go back to my opening comments. Do you really believe in liberty? Do you really believe in freedom? Do you want academic freedom? Do you want intellectual liberty? Do you want to have a robust exchange of ideas with truth winning the day at the end of the debate? If so, why are we shutting down the conversation and saying to me on TV and the floor of the Oklahoma Senate, we're not going to talk about this anymore? If that's the direction that Common Core education will go, where somebody in power is going to shut the door and say, we're done talking about this, take your medicine and be quiet, I'm uncomfortable with that, because that's not good education, and that's not academic freedom, and that's not excellence. That's dumbing it down to mediocrity because somebody in power decided that my ideas are not worthy at this point, and that's not what good education is.
Brian's going to comment, and then you can comment, Jenny.
related to your question, on anything that is being implemented, it is so important to always have an open mind. So to Ms. Garrett's question, yes, as things come up, as they're doing implementation on the test and what those tests look like, on what that looks like at the local classroom level, there should be an opportunity for feedback and the ability to make improvements. It's about higher standards. I would say that one of the reasons that this is so necessary is Oklahoma did develop standards, and they developed a lot of standards under PASS. And if you'll talk to classroom teachers today, they will tell you there are too many standards within the school year in which they're having to teach to the test. They follow a pacing calendar, and they feel as though they're not able to cover all the subjects that they would like in the level of detail that they would like. We've got so many standards that we're not doing a good job at the ones that we've developed. So we've done that in Oklahoma. We need to go back and continue to improve that until we get it right.
Jenny?
So we're not teaching to the test now? Okay, well, under Common Core, we're not going to be teaching to the test.
Under Common Core, let's not confuse standards with curriculum.
Well, and I understand what you're saying, but I think it's really important to, I mean, we have had a lot of analogies about the differences between standards and curriculum, and we can go over and over those, but as a former classroom teacher, I will tell you that if you have a set of standards, okay, I have to teach this and this and this, then I have to go back and I have to make up curriculum to find ways to teach this and this and this, right?
Yeah.
So standards actually do dictate curriculum. There's no way around that. Now, whether or not I choose to get my curriculum out of this book or off Wikipedia, for Pete's sakes, I mean, we can have that argument and we can split those hairs, but it really, the basis of it is when you're dealing with a set of standards that are copyrighted, and let's not forget that these are copyrighted standards. Well, what is a copyright? Well, copyright means that I have developed these and you can only use them within the bounds that I've suggested. Isn't that a copyright, right? They are copyrighted. It says that they're copyrighted on the state, so on the Common Core website. So if I have a problem with them and I want to go to, well, I've tried to go to the state superintendent. That hasn't worked out very well for me. But let's say I even went to my superintendent. My kids were in Oklahoma State Public Schools at one point in time. I was allowed 3 whole minutes there to be able to make complaints about that. And so I was listened for 3 minutes. But even in that period of time, if I had said, well, I really don't like the way that we're forcing my kid to learn all of this math, they went from 2 plus 2 to 2 minus 2 to 22 minus 22 to 22 plus 2. We just kept going before he had even learned his math facts. I said, why is this happening? Well, because Common Core is dictating that they have to know this before they get out of there. So I went to my principal. Why can we fix this? Well, I can't. It's coming down from the state. So I go to the superintendent, Carl Springer. Explain to me, can we change this? Well, this is the way it's coming down from the state. So I'm not really sure where my local control factor has actually ever met it out in the whole process.
All right, next question. Please state your name and ask your question.
My name is Randy Hamilton. Over the last year, I have had occasion to become very familiar with the educational initiative in Texas called C-Scope. C-Scope, by the way, was also copyrighted. C-Scope was totally unsuitable for citizens to live in a free America. What it was suitable for was to take children and produce them as ideal inhabitants of a new Soviet Union. My question is, what assurances do you have to offer us that Common Core will not be the same thing as C-Scope?
Well, I'm not familiar with that particular program, so I don't know how to make a comparison there. But
you want to know what not to do.
Well, we'll have to in a C-Scope. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes,
C-Scope?
And the center of the C-Scope Corporation, which had no physical address, was in Houston. And you should know exactly what that is, because actually that's how I became alerted to Common Core.
Well, I'm going to try to take a stab at your question and say that
Get on Google and put in CSCOPE and Houston, and you'll find out a lot. Now, I've found out further than that. I've actually seen videos of the screens, and I believe, Mr. Hunt, that you at least had children. If your children had gone through C-scope, they'd be coming home and refusing to obey you because they've been told that the state is their mother and father, not you.
I'm not familiar with C-scope, and I don't know, any of the details of what you've described as to how that might relate to what we're doing in Oklahoma.
It
I'll
was
be glad
sold
look into it.
Texas on exactly the same basis that you gentlemen were offering to sell Common Core to us.
I'm not familiar
We'll
with
have them check it out, Randy. We'll have them we'll send them some information, because at the end, we're going to give you their contact information, and you can send them information, and and then I can't guarantee you they'll look at it, but you can send it to them.
I don't know if this is pertinent to the question, but I know Texas is one of the states that has not signed on to the Common Core initiative.
Next question, please.
My name is Charles Barthel. My question is mainly for you, Mr. Hunt. The Tulsa School District in the last few years is making a number of hires out of a program called Teach for America, where the teachers that are brought into the Tulsa district are certified, I believe, by the Federal Department of Education. They have their own textbook that comes with it. I'm not sure what's in it. I've heard it's very expensive. And are all of these teachers paid by the federal government instead of the school district? And does it have any relationship to Common Core and more input from the federal government into our local school district?
Sure, I'd be glad to answer that. I was on the board when Teach for America decided to come to Tulsa Public Schools. They're now in Oklahoma City Public Schools. And that was 2010. Related to payment, I don't know that the federal government is involved with Teach for America in terms of how core members are paid. The idea is that we have a teacher shortage, especially in subject areas. We've always struggled to find foreign language, math, and science, and we're seeing teacher shortages in other areas. And Teach for America is kind of this concept that high-achieving college students that have majored in math, who have majored in science, that want to take the opportunity to give back and teach to our children, go through an intensive training process. In Tulsa, that included a summer institute at the University of Tulsa, in which they actually provided summer school to some of Tulsa Public's most neediest children that needed additional remediation and help to stay on grade level. And that's part of their training, as well as mentors from other teachers as well. I'm not aware that Teach for America has been brought into the Common Core debate. They are viewed as employees of Tulsa Public Schools and are treated as regular classroom teachers. But they have a very intensive training process, because these are teachers that have not traditionally gone through the College of Education to get a certification. There was the opportunity when they came to Oklahoma that they are actually certified by the state. And as you all may know, the state has an alternative certification process. So, for example, Lane Matheson, who is a wonderful teacher out at Memorial High School teaching robotics and engineering, is in her second career, having worked at NASA. So it's that same type of concept, if that helps address your question.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Can I ask a question, though? How do you know that we have a dirge of science and math teachers?
You mean a shortage?
Right.
Oh, I mean, if you'll talk to superintendents around the state, Dr. Ballard, Superintendent Springer, they will tell you those are some of the hardest positions to fill, along with special ed and foreign language. When you think about what a teacher makes compared to what people in industry can make related to strong math, science, and engineering degrees, we're at a competitive disadvantage.
Okay. Just a thought to maybe think about is, though, is it a problem to get some teachers into schools because, maybe discipline isn't upheld in classrooms, and there's a lot of problem with them being able to go into classrooms and keep order in their classrooms without having, a lot of feedback from, the administration. I think there are a lot of political things that are going on that are not really indicative of an actual lack of science teachers. I mean, because when you go and you actually do a little bit of research on it, it seems the research tends to show that the teachers are out there, they're just simply not being employed, or they're not going to schools because they don't like either the payment or the way the school is run.
Next question, please.
My name is Olivia Goodwin, and I am a first grade classroom teacher. You have used the phrase, if Common Core is implemented. We've been implementing it in our classrooms for almost 2 years. So it's not a question of if, it's already happening. We're spending our own time and money doing a lot of professional development on how to incorporate it into our classrooms because there is no state funding for professional development, or it's really vague. With that being said, you've said that Common Core is going to be raising the bar and increasing the rigor. From my first grade standards in math, nothing has become more rigorous. The standards are exactly the same as what the past was. They've just taken some away. I'm no longer teaching my first graders about money. They don't get any money skills in kindergarten. They no longer get money skills in first grade. They don't get any money skills until second grade. Calendar skills are gone. Fractions are gone. Patterning is gone. That's all moved up to a higher grade. So how is Common Core more rigorous when, in my personal experience with my first grade math standards, nothing has become more rigorous? They've just taken stuff away.
Yeah, I'll attribute my comments to a Freudian slip, maybe. I'm assuming that this is a part of an ongoing conversation, and that full implementation has not been put in place in the state.
I think your upper grades right now are having to teach both PASS and Common Core because you have groups of children that are still being tested with PASS. You have groups of children that are moving into Core, but at the lower levels, we've already started implementing Core because PASS is gone.
I mean, I can't speak to your personal experience. I can speak though to what I've read so far. And I mean, I think that they are very focused on making sure that students learn in a kind of a build on knowledge over time. Learn at the basic level in the first and second grade, and then build on that over time. I'm not a teacher, so I don't know all the terminology that the academics use. But it is an attempt to try to raise standards.
But how is that bar being raised if it's taking away a portion of standards that we previously taught, but it's not being made more rigorous at the lower levels?
I don't have an answer to your specific issue. I'd have to. I mean, I think it would be an issue. What does your principal say, or your leadership say? I don't know. I mean, I'd have to.
We don't have a choice. We have to teach Common Core.
May I?
Where do your orders come from? Who tells you what you have to teach?
The State Department of Education.
Okay.
May I?
Dr. Piper would like to address it.
What's your name again, please?
Olivia Goodwin.
One more time, please.
Olivia Goodwin.
Olivia, I would much rather you teach, you develop your own curriculum, you decide what my children are going to learn, than some faceless bureaucrat off in a distant room make that decision. Thank you for being a good teacher. You know what you're doing.
Thank you.
And it would be pedantic and presumptuous of someone that doesn't understand teaching to try to dumb down the curriculum to what they consider to be
That's
common.
why most of us are still teaching what we have always taught.
Thank you. Next question.
Well, and I have to say that even though I'm not a classroom teacher anymore, I am a home educator. And I think one of the things that frustrates me more than anything is that when we have people who aren't, and I'm not trying to be ugly here, it's just an actual frustration. When people who have never been involved in education, my father is a professor at OU in journalism. My mom taught for 30 years English. Trust me, I have had plenty of English. My grandfather was a law professor. I have just, my whole family has been teachers. And it is extraordinarily frustrating when I read that things are implemented. Nobody who was involved in these Common Core state standards were teachers. None of them. Not a single one of them. And then when they're implemented by people who have not been classroom teachers or professors or in education in any way, then what you're forced to do then is to say, well, I've read what somebody is saying, and so now I'm going to form an opinion about what they've been saying. But you've just heard this classroom teacher explain something that really is not being heard on any level, because we have people who aren't educators making the decisions for education.
It's a tough crowd, Chris.
Yeah, I know. Well, I was just gonna say, Jenny, with all due respect, I think teachers were involved in the development of the standards, as well as superintendents and others in the education field. So I know they were involved, and I can't speak to this teacher's specific issue. It is a concern if she's saying that the standards are not as high as they were before. That would be a concern to me.
Well, I'm gonna make this an actual debate, and I'm gonna come back at you one more time. Yes, there were teachers that were involved. I mean, they did make an absolute show, and I will say show, of inviting teachers to come and be involved in these state standards. But I think what you actually have to do in order to be able to put this into context and determine for yourself, and I'm not saying to take my word for it either. Go look at the standards, read the standards, compare like the social studies standards to the national standards, and see if you find out any similarities in them at all. So basically what ended up happening, and this is the other thing, I'm starting to get my blood pressure up now, it's very disingenuous, because you can say, I'm going to invite teachers to my house, but you can listen to what they have to say, but then shove your hands in your ears and go blah, 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 blah the whole time. And so basically what ended up happening was we gave teachers lip service. Yes, you can be, involved, but then when the standards came out, because of the fact that Brad Henry put all this Common Core state standards into law by executive order, the state is having to implement that law. And so by law, she can say teachers were involved all she wants, but it comes down to following the law. And if she does want to follow the law says we have to teach Common Core science, social studies, art, language arts, and math.
All right. We're going to let you have your turn.
Okay.
Sorry.
You're fine. My name is Angie Rains, and I'm here today as a parent. I have two kids, one in 5th grade, one in kindergarten. So came here today from 9 to 4 to just learn a little bit more about Common Core. And so I have some notes. I'm going to just keep it real brief. But what my concerns still are is, after doing some homework before today and listening all day long today, I'm still kind of wondering, why, if the goal of Common Core is to be able to compare states, why we can't just take ACT scores, which already exist. Because you can just look right now at ACT scores and have the states all ranked, and just, I know we always look to Florida to copy their ideas. We've beat them the last 3 years or more. I've just gone back 3 years. I didn't go farther. And same to Kentucky, because you just mentioned Kentucky earlier, so I had to just look that up real fast. So I think that the ultimate result is going to be very similar to what we would see on ACT scores.
To your point, and I've heard legislators bring that point up, and I personally think it's a valid point. ACT is a standard that's been adopted for decades around the nation. I think that will probably be a point of discussion moving forward. Is what is going to be your test standard or your measurement standard? And some have suggested ACT. I certainly wouldn't discount that as a real option. And I'm glad you mentioned that we did better than Florida. I think that ought to be well known that Oklahoma outdid Florida on the ACT scores recently.
Thank you.
I would follow up on that in terms of, obviously the ACT is typically taken as a junior, sometimes your senior year. What we're talking about in terms of comparing across states goes all the way down into where we're currently starting testing, and that's 3rd grade. So it's more of a sense of benchmarks along the way rather than a surprise at the end of your high school career.
Yes, sir.
My name is John Fraser. I have no formal education, so there might be a little mistake in my grammar in my question, but this is for you, particularly, I think. As I understand it, a lot of money is paid to the testing companies that put these tests together for our local schools here in Oklahoma. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
That's true?
Yes.
Well, my question is, why can't the tests be developed here by our educators for our students in our schools in Oklahoma?
You're asking me the question.
Robbie?
Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. You're asking me the question, correct, sir?
Yeah.
I think what I hear you asking is why don't we have local control to come up with our own tests, our own curriculum, perpetuate our own ideas within our own communities?
Right.
And that is my argument. Good education for centuries has been localized. Excellent education for centuries has been the responsibility of the scholar and the responsibility of the school that you choose. I'll emphasize again that you choose to send your child to. Ideas are always going to have consequences. Ideas always lead somewhere. And good ideas are going to lead to bad education in bad places and bad culture and bad behavior. Bad ideas will lead to bad places. Good ideas will lead to good places. And I would argue that the people in this room would like to have the freedom and the liberty to decide what ideas that they would like to inculcate in their next generation of leaders within this community, this church, this culture, and this country. And there's no evidence whatsoever that when the responsibility is given locally, that somehow education flounders. Unless the community has been victimized by decade after decade of an educational establishment that we're now talking about giving control to that establishment to cure the very disease that they've caused. And that's my problem. Don't give more control to the enterprise and the industry that's causing the problem in the first place.
Thank you.
And I would like to say this. I'm sorry I'm getting long-winded, and forgive me in doing that, so I'll be brief on this. I believe the solution is this, that we should be less interested in legislating commonality and more interested in liberty that comes from inculcating character.
Right. Short statement. What first got me interested in this, I have an 11-year-old daughter that goes to school in Calera. And when the tests first come up, I immediately went to the school. I wanted to find out what questions were being asked of my 11-year-old daughter. Well, I was talking to the principal as he was sealing up the envelope and said, no one is allowed to see these tests other than the teachers, and then we send them right back to the testing company. I don't get it.
I would take your daughter and I'd send her to a different school.
You said it.
Next question.
I would just comment, I think it's important to realize, as the state of Oklahoma, we have got to have some sense of working on assessments, good quality assessments together. And having served on the Tulsa School Board for 4 years, I'm certainly a proponent of local control. There are lots of things that happen at the state level that make you wonder what they were thinking and where did they get their input. But can you imagine if you take this to the extreme? I mean, let's think about this. Salisaw, Woodward, Enid, Hugo, Altus are all going to develop their own tests. They're going to develop their own sense of what third graders and fourth graders and fifth graders are doing. I would suggest to you that as a state, we're in this together as a state. We are a small state. We have limited resources. And that is why we've got the ability as a state to pull together related to assessments, understanding where our children are today.
Well, you're never going to have a kid from Woodward who's going to need to have the exact same outlook on life, or, I mean, even if you wanted to go to workforce here, you're not going to have the same population of students in Woodward that you're going to have in Hugo. It's an entirely different thing. So, I mean, even just regionally, I mean, in terms of everything, there's a big difference there. So why is it that we must force Woodward to be like Hugo?
I'll comment as well. I mean, I don't think it's a matter of trying to force one community to be like another. there is a need to be able to measure how our students are doing, and I would say it's because we are in a competitive environment like never before. Brian alluded to it a little bit in his opening comments. We're not the America post-World War II where we were the only economy standing, where we had an absolute advantage and anyone could go out and find a job. Competition internationally has risen to a point that our students have to know more, and they have to be able to know more to be able to compete in today's world. So knowing and being able to measure what they know is important, and being able to know how we stack up against other states is important, because the job recruitment activity is very intense. We are actively trying to recruit business to Oklahoma, and we're trying to do that against the likes of the Texas and Arkansas and other states, as well as internationally. And so being able to demonstrate to companies what our students are achieving and how knowledgeable they are is very important.
With regard to the local community control again, I would suggest that people in Sallisaw are smart enough to make their own decisions on how to educate their children, and to suggest otherwise is rather insulting to the people of Sallisaw. The homeschool family of Sallisaw has the right to homeschool the way they will, and frankly, the data shows, the test shows, the national data, all the measurements show that homeschool kid out of Sallisaw is probably going to perform better than the public high school kid out of Tulsa. Let the people of Sallisaw educate their kids.
You know what, and I wouldn't disagree with that. I think I've seen a lot of homeschoolers. They used to come to the Capitol every year, and it was one of my favorite days of the year, because some really strong families would come to the Capitol. We had to interact with them, and they are very high performers. But you can't discount the fact that there are many students, thousands of students around the state that don't have the kind of families that can offer that. So you have to have public education. And you have to be able to provide that education opportunity for them, because they don't have the family support that many of our homeschool students have.
Well, we don't educate kids to put them into jobs. I mean, and we just simply don't do that. And America has never done that. And I find it very interesting that we go back to that, because, and you mentioned Governor Fallon's education initiative now that she's NGA president. Well, just recently, I took the comments that she made about education and the workforce, and I compared them with what Hu Jintao said to the Politburo in China. And they were, very interestingly, very much alike. So I think what's happened is that over time, because of the fact that we have meddled in local education to the point where people don't even understand what form of government we have, our own history standards, for Pete's sake. So we say we live in a constitutional democracy. I don't even know what that is. So apparently we have so much oil here in Oklahoma, we could put people into jobs just like that. But the problem is our president has regulated us out of the business. You would think that people in Oklahoma would be not so worried about education as educating their citizenry on how to fight somebody coming in and telling us what we can and cannot do in our own state.
Representative Benj, I agree we have a problem. I agree that there are many broken families. I agree that the culture is a mess. But is it possible that our lousy school system is what caused it in the first place? So why double down? Why double down and continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results? David McKenna once said the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Well, the predictor of future behavior for the public education system isn't all that great.
And I guess my question would be, what would the alternative be then? And what are we going to do with those students who...
What I'm doing at Oklahoma Wesleyan seems to work pretty well.
And I don't disagree with that either. As I mentioned, I think private school options are good. I think homeschool options are good. But my point is, you can never do away with the public education need, whether it's the current system or some kind of new system, which I don't know what that would be, but you have to have public education.
I agree. And when I said a lousy public education system, let me clarify what I'm saying. It's not because we have necessarily poor teachers. Olivia obviously has demonstrated that she's a solution to the problem, not the problem herself. But imposing upon her restrictions that stops her from doing her job in an excellent fashion is doubling down on the same error, the same ideological fallacies that we've embraced decade after decade. Let her do her job, whether it be in Sallisaw or Tulsa or Bartlesville.
Next question.
Well, I kind of hate to interrupt this because this was my question.
You want us to keep going?
I do, because this is good stuff. I'm Brent Colley from Ponca City, and I worked for an international oil company before I retired and spent a lot of time overseas, lived in 4 foreign countries, 6 or so different states. One of the things that is a recurring theme as we got to know people in foreign countries is that the American education system, I'm talking about the higher education system, is the envy of the world. I believe it is the envy of the world, and those people in foreign countries will tell you it's the envy of the world because we have, what I heard back here, the free marketplace of ideas. It's developed because of that. And what I hear from Common Core is now, as much as you say you don't want a federal system of dictates of how we are going to set standards, you've replaced that with a dictate of unaccountable governors association. None of these people are accountable to any citizen. They're going to make the dictate. Central planning does not work. The people of the world will tell you that. It didn't work for the USSR. And what you are proposing sounds a lot more like communist Russia than it does a free America. So explain to me, if you will, why the free market and American initiative is a bad thing and central planning, which is what Common Core is a good thing.
Good question. Good comments. I would first of all add that Rhonda didn't read my favorite statement to you all. I added that to my bio, that one of my favorite statements is by Ronald Reagan when he told Mr. Gorbachev, tear down these walls. Believe me, I'm an ardent anti-communist if I need to offer those credentials for this room. But I will tell you that if you're denouncing a state-led effort, that going back to before our current Constitution, we had a Articles of Confederacy, and we had a system where states worked. They were independent, but they also worked together in some ways. I'm not sure what you would then want to go to. I mean, do we need to go then to city-states or something even more local? I'm a big believer that states are a better design and a better government for today. And I think states are the incubator for ideas. And so if it's not a collection of our states and state-led, I guess I don't know where you take that then. I guess you could take it down even to a further level, local level, but I think that it would be even more disparate and it would be even more difficult to in this case, understand how we stack up against our competitors, basically.
I just put together a cartoon because I've been trying to cartoon all my thoughts about Common Core, and my last cartoon was a picture of Karl Marx, and it says, Karl Marx says, Common Core is state-led, and state is in red. And I think when you talk about it being state-led, you're talking about the National Governors Association. You're not talking about the state of Oklahoma. You're talking about a private dues-paying organization which has no open records at all, no accountability to the public at all. Our governor, our personal governor, Mary Fallin, has accountability to the public. I haven't gotten in to see her after asking numerous times, but I'm sure that she still hears what I say. And that's the point. That's the point. She's an elected official. She must respond to my concerns as an elected official. The National Governors Association is an association of locally elected government officials. When you put that association together and say, well, the standards come from them, and they didn't, by the way. They were written by two men at Jason Zimba and David Coleman at Student Achievement Partners, who then sold it to Achieve, and then Achieve got money from Bill Gates to sell it to the National Governors Association. None of that sounds local to me at all. So I think what we need to do is we need to decide what's local and what's state-led.
Next question.
My name is Amanda Teagarden, and thank you very much for panelists for being here today. It's very interesting to see that this is a left-right or right-left issue here, and there's a complete disagreement here on the role and purpose of education. One is promoting liberty and the right of the individual to develop their own innate abilities that were given to them by God, and the other one is saying that the Department of Labor is to determine what educational requirements are for the state of Oklahoma. And my questions for you are, this is in the category of know and do, which is school to work. This is for Mr. Brian Hunt. On that, you said, I don't believe there is a privacy issue at this time. And my question for you is, have you seen all the Department of Public Education's Tulsa Public Schools information sharing agreements? All of them?
No, I have not reviewed all of those agreements.
Are you aware that there are school clinics in Tulsa Public Schools, and that the school clinics then becomes the medical home for those students and their families?
What I do know is there are partnerships with the University of Oklahoma in Tulsa Public Schools to provide some health-based clinics, yes.
And who gets to see the medical records of the students?
I've never operated at that level of discussion, so I don't know.
Then how do you know that there isn't a privacy issue in the schools?
You know, I'm going to tell you based on, I committed 4 years to serving on a school board. I'm proud of that service. I did it because I love this community and I'm raising my family here. And I have to put trust in people like Dr. Ballard, who I believe are doing a great job and are in fact holding staff accountable and are following the law.
Would you be willing to find and research and read all of the data information sharing agreements that TPS, Edison, and all the other schools that your kids go to find where all their data is going? Would you be willing to do that?
You know, I only have so much time in a day in terms of, I mean, she's asking me to research all privacy agreements.
It's an open records request, and you have connections with the school board.
If that's something that you would like to do and you'd like to sit down and talk about it, I'd be glad to.
What I'm
I don't know
then
exactly
going to
where
observe,
you're
sir,
going
is
with
that you
this.
have no factual knowledge about whether there's a privacy issue or not in the public school system.
She's going with me.
Well, I can, well, no, what she's saying
is
is that when you made the statement, Brian, that there are no privacy issues as far as the information on our children getting out into other areas, that she's questioning that statement that you made because you don't know that for a fact, is what she's saying, because they are mining information from our children, and just as there have been leaks in banks, and there have been leaks in the IRS, and there have been leaks everywhere, you cannot guarantee that that their privacy is being guarded with the information that they're collecting.
I don't know what examples or concerns that you have specifically. If you'd like to talk about this in more detail, I'd be glad to. I do believe that school districts are following the law.
I think you've answered the question that you are not willing to ask for and read the data sharing agreements that your kids' schools have agreed to.
I read everything that is related to my child's education, from when I enroll them at the school to their transcripts. And so I read the documents in front of me related to your level of interest on every data agreement. No, I've not read every data agreement at Tulsa Public Schools.
Dr. Piper, does Oklahoma Wesleyan University have access to students' medical records?
To my knowledge, we do not unless they provide them voluntarily, to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Next question, please.
Can I make a quick?
Sure.
Representative Benj, Speaker Benj, I'd like to ask you a question. Who makes the laws in Oklahoma?
The legislature, and then the governor signs or vetoes.
Okay. Do you realize that there are, just as Amanda said, memorandums of understanding that are created interagency that actually serve as agency laws outside of the laws of the state?
I know there's a process where agencies can propose rules, and they have to do it publicly, but it is up to the legislature to approve or disapprove those rules, so it still has to go before the legislature.
In terms of the State Department of Education, they have created a number of memorandums of understanding with other organizations to share data, particularly the Department of Corrections and the Department of Health and Human Services, and that has not gone before the legislature.
Thank you.
My question is also on data collection, and hopefully I can give you a better picture.
Get a little closer to the mic.
Hopefully I can give you a better picture of how we feel as the public that you are asking. My name is Julia C. For these purposes, I'm going to refer to this audience as stakeholders. There are rules in the Common Core. There's language in there that allows our government to share data collected on our students with stakeholders. Has a very broad definition. It's people that are interested in our children's data. Our government, well, I'm just going to say these people in this audience, I'm sure, are more trustworthy than our government.
Amen.
And so I'm going to ask you, in favor of Common Core, here's the information I would like to have on your children to share with my stakeholders here and whomever they decide would also be interested. I'd like to have their social security numbers. I'd like to have their blood type and other medical information. I'd like to have their parents' voting records, their parents' income, any disciplinary problems for the rest of their life. I would like for that to go with all of these people. Just go ahead and continue providing that information. I'd like to post any problems they've ever had with any teacher. I would like to post all their grades and transcripts because we want to decide who they should work for when they grow up. Is that all right with you? Is that okay? Do you think that is maybe a little intrusive? Can we stop it with the data collection? It's horrible. You're asking the people of Oklahoma who have students to trust the government with that kind of information. We don't. And you're going to tell our children what? They can't be educated then in the state of Oklahoma if they won't provide that information to be shared with stakeholders that the government decides should have it?
I know there's a question in there, and I'm going to assume that it's about data sharing from students to the government. And yeah, if students' information is being broadcast widely to other government agencies, that would be a concern to me. Absolutely. I'm going to assume.
We just tried to get a law passed that would at least require parental consent. And Barisi sent John Craman over to warp it into nothing, into a law that does not require any parental consent. We tried. We asked them to slow it down until we could get the cost of the stupid thing. The governor killed that bill. Why are they so determined to cram this down our throats when we're screaming, no, no, no? The public input has been overwhelmingly stop it, stop it, stop. And they say, well, we've got public input, let's do it. I'm sick of it. We're sick of it up to here. Stop it.
Okay. Now, to Brian and to Chris, I gave you an opportunity to invite people that were in favor of Common Core. So, I mean, I'm just letting you know. I mean, I did open the invitation for you to invite people as well. So, yes, sir.
Well, I'll apologize in advance here because I'm not asking a question, but an answer was requested from the representative because he seemed to only understand that he couldn't understand anything other than the state as the solution of our education problems. So a little background, I'm a homeschool father of 5. I don't take much credit for my education of my children. My wife has been a phenomenal educator. There's no question about that. Out of 5 children, I have 3 summa cum laude graduates from Oklahoma Baptist University, the University of Tulsa, and University of Central Oklahoma. I have 2 boys still in college. Among those 5, we have 2 National Merit Scholars. Why I'm saying this is because, not to toot our own horn, but you haven't pursued what are excellent methods of education. You want to know how to educate? You go talk to my wife, and you will learn how to educate.
Next question, please.
My name is Judith Adams. I think my question keeps morphing. I was going to
Speak up a little bit louder.
I was going to ask Mr. Benge if he would mind giving some specifics about what employees are needed that we cannot find people to serve in those jobs. I believe with a unemployment rate of more than 7%, maybe more like 15%. We will be able to find those employees. I also believe in the free market and self-determination, that if people know that there are jobs available, they will get themselves trained for those jobs. Can you comment on your comment?
Yeah, I mean, the one example that comes to mind currently would be, and I hope they don't mind me using their name, but I'm going to, Webco has informed us that they are now asking for master's level engineers. They are asking for that kind of education level for the engineers that they hire, because the current bachelor's level is not meeting their need.
And I would like to comment, I think this is not quite a question, but maybe I can phrase it as a question. I think it's very easy to think that the government is the solution to all problems. To me, it's a simplistic answer. They're going to run our health care. They're going to run our education system. I think it's more challenging to think outside the box and think about individual solutions that respect our freedom and don't interfere with the God-given right to parent our children.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with a lot of what you just said. I think that I certainly don't agree, or I certainly would agree that government is not the answer to all of our problems. But, you know, government does provide some services for the public that the public maybe in some cases can't necessarily carry out themselves. For example, road building, I think, is a good example. And I would always
Who's going to build the roads?
I would always, again, harken back to we're always going to need a public education system. Private schools and home schools are wonderful, but we're always going to need a system of public education.
Okay, one of my questions is where do you get the authority to do that? Where do you get the authority to steal from me to do what you think you should do in education? Where does that authority come from? Because it's not in the Constitution. That's my first question. And then secondly, I was sitting over there and I was just baffled by you two that you still, after everything you've heard today, you're still supporting this, fully supporting. You're not even budging. You've not been convinced of anything. And so then I was reading, oh, I get it now. So I'm going to read something, John Taylor Gatto again. Okay, this is where he's talking about communism taking over our schools. And he says, school in America became like school in Germany, a servant of corporate and political management. Again, and what did you guys talk about? The workforce and businesses, business development. That's what both of you do. You lobby for the chamber, am I right? So it's in the chamber's best interest, isn't it, if Common Core goes through? Isn't that good for the chamber and for your business also?
It's good for the community overall. I mean, if we have jobs and we have the ability to provide for our families, which is basically just a fundamental desire and need, we need to be able to do that. And we do that by being educated enough to be able to hold down a job. I'm trying to remember the other questions you had. Yeah, I mean, I don't have the authority myself. We're talking about state government overall providing education to citizens, and they were able to do so through the elected officials that have to stand before the people and are elected. They set policy and they pass budgets, and so through our elected officials, those are the people that are empowered to do so.
I would just say, you know, in response to your question, all I know is who I am and where I came from. And public education is where I am today. It's as a result of the teachers that I had at Holmes Elementary at 45th and Peoria, Edison Junior High, Edison High School, that gave me the opportunity to go to the University of Oklahoma and get a bachelor's and a master's. I am the first generation college within my family. My father went to Central High School in his class of 58. My mother is Nathan Hale High School, class of 64. They both got post-secondary training, but this was an opportunity for me. And so I feel very strong about public education, and I think it's clear based on what Chris has also talked about that there's room for lots of choice, but at the end of the day, I think, and I don't remember what the numbers are, 95% of all Oklahoma students are in public education. The reason that most of us are in this room are because of great teachers. And so, you know, I'm not going to change my mind in terms of support for public education. I'm certainly willing to listen to concerns and ideas and what implementation looks like related to Common Core, but we were invited to be part of a panel today in which you were going to get both sides of the argument so that you could make up your own mind. So that's the reason I'm here and took, you know, a couple of hours out of my Saturday to be here. I hope that helps.
We appreciate it. Go ahead and listen, it's 4 o'clock. Let's make it quick as far as getting the questions done so that we can wrap up real
Rhonda,
quick.
can I interject just quick? I'll try to be quick about it. Do you remember what the Northwest Ordinance said? Do you remember by any chance? Because I don't remember. But the Northwest Ordinance was the original, when the Pilgrims came over, that was their edict for establishing education in the colonies. And it was basically to establish religion and morality. Because of religion and morality, we expect to establish education. And what we're finding here and what I'm hearing on a constant basis is a straw man argument. Well, the community is not providing education, and so therefore we're going to take the education over and we'll do it ourselves. And so I think the very interesting thing that we really have to think about is, where did public education come from? Well, it was actually an edict brought along with the Pilgrims, because the reason why they came here is because they were not able to read the Bible, and they were not able to govern themselves because they couldn't read the Bible. So reading was huge to them. They wanted to make sure that this population of people in America was going to do that. And so they were very large proponents of public education. I actually, in our organization, actually is. That's why we call ourselves Restore Oklahoma Public Education. But you can't create a situation in which, because the community, who took care of schooling? Churches did. Who took care of the poor? Churches did. So when the government comes in and takes that away from the churches and then say, well, you can't do it, so we'll do it better, that's absolutely and completely inappropriate. So what you have here, in essence, basically is a big government solution because of a big government problem. And it was the problem that you created, which was to go in and say, you know what, we don't do, LBJ, thanks LBJ, you know, relegating the churches to such a position in which they couldn't take care of the community. But here's something that always frustrates me. So legislators will tell me this all the time. Well, we have to have public education, but it's just that they're not doing a very good job of it as it is. Well, you know what? If you actually said, you know what, we're getting out, take care of it yourself, you don't think nature abhors the vacuum enough for them to take it over and do it themselves? I guarantee they would, and they would do it better than the government.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, we've got to cut the questions off, guys, because we've got to wrap it up. So go ahead. I mean, we'll go ahead and take these, but let's make it quick.
My name is Joanne Swanner, and I'm new to Oklahoma. Thank you very much for what you just said, because my question is, in this state, I think more than anything, we need to get back to basic morality. In the whole country, actually, because in the 60s and all, they told us we have to stop saying anything about God, anything about the Bible. We can talk about Muslim things, but we can't talk about the Bible. We can't talk about the Ten Commandments, basic morality, but we can tell people they came from monkeys or whatever. And I was wondering, are we able to teach creation in this state, or does it all have to be evolution? And I think that's the core bottom line of the situation and the problem in education.
Well, if we're going to do, the state has implemented the Common Core Science Standards, and one of the largest comments that anybody has made about the science standards is that they're evolutionary. There is no, it's a very humanistic approach. There is no intelligent design at all, even forwarded in that particular document and those standards. So I hope that answers your question.
Then why are Oklahomans who are very conservative and God-fearing going for this? I'd like to know.
That's a great question. Darren?
Mine's more of a statement to Speaker Benj. Webco is a private company, correct? Yes. They can't hire a recruiter to go out and find the engineers that they need on their own?
I'm sorry.
They can't go out and hire the engineers that they need? They can't hire a recruiter to go...
That's what we're hearing, yes.
But they can't hire a recruiter on their own to go find them? They're not out there in the United States anywhere?
I just know they're having trouble finding engineers that can meet the skill level that they need to...
So they turn to the state and the state chamber?
I'm sorry?
They turn to the state and the state chamber to find them?
No, not necessarily. I'm just the question was asked because I had made the statement earlier that a lot of our companies are having trouble finding skilled employees. And so we hear that continually. And so someone asked the question, do you have an example? And that was the only example that I thought of immediately was that company.
Correct, but it sounds as though they're turning to the state for their solution when they could just as easily hire their own recruiters and go out and get them.
Well, but I think your question though gets to the part of what we've been discussing here. It seems like that this has turned into more of a conversation about whether public education is needed or not. I think that's pretty clear from the folks in the audience that public education apparently is not needed. But
I'm just tired of the government business aspect of this whole thing. The crony capitalism is a runaway in this country now, and the taxpayers are paying for a lot of what these companies need. But the taxpayers don't get back
but I guess
from these companies.
I guess what I would pose back would be if they can't find, where are they going to go then to find their engineers? Engineers are educated in schools, and so they are just saying we're having a hard time finding.
The free market will take care of that, though.
The free market will take care of it?
Yes, sir, it will. They'll move on to somewhere else if we don't have them here, which is to our own demise, but we can't keep asking the taxpayers to come up with these solutions for these businesses when they can just as well find the solutions themselves.
But I don't know if they have the ability to educate an engineer. I mean, that takes, in this case, a master's level engineer takes 6 years to do so. So I think I'm trying to connect with what you're saying, but I think that there's, I guess the bottom line is there's always a need to educate people so they can fill jobs in the workforce.
Darren, can I just cut in?
Yeah.
Why don't you guys can maybe discuss this?
Sidebar.
Yes, sir. But let me just state this, Chris, and maybe what you're hearing is that public education is that we're wanting to do away with public education, and that's not what the message that I hear, and maybe it's because we sit on different sides. I hear that what we need to do is we need the public education to get back at the local level and not allow the state or the federal government to be able to dictate what it is that we do at the local levels, because many of us believe in the free market. If it's not good, and it works here. If I didn't send my children to one of the schools here locally because I knew the issues that they had at that school, and so I moved so that I could put them in the school that I wanted to. And so my children are publicly educated, and they graduated in the top of their class, and I'm very proud of what they've done. But it comes back to local is what we're talking about. We're tired of it being legislated to us what our education needs to be, and it needs to come down and back to the core of our country, which is our families and our communities. Sorry, I just didn't want you to think that we want to do away with public education, because public education is needed very much. Yes, sir.
Gary Kilpatrick. And Mr. Benz, I don't mean to pile on, but earlier you said that Texas was one of the states that had opted out, and I agree. And in fact, they've updated their math standard, and some people are saying they think it's going to turn out to be the premier standard in the United States. You also mentioned one time that states are the incubator of public policy. Later on, you said states are the incubator of ideas, and I agree with you on that. My question is, if you believe that, why do you support Common Core, which throws out that incubator concept, and it goes to the concept of let's all have a common standard, when what we should be doing, I think, to help businesses, to help the companies you're talking about, to have better higher education, is that we ought to be developing our own state standards, and we ought to be modeling those after whoever we look around and we think has the best going. Let's try it. And then if somebody else comes out with a better one, we go to that. But what you've opted for, I say you, the legislature, has opted for is a common standard, a standard that we have no chance to change. We can't be competitive as a state. We've got to do exactly what every other 45 states are doing, and we're going to be competing with Texas, who's going to be using a better mathematics standard, probably a better science standard. They're going to be creating more jobs, creating better people, and we're going to be competing against that with the common standard and no chance to change. I just don't. You seem to talk out of both sides of your mouth. You like the philosophy, but you don't want to implement it.
Well, I'll attempt to try to address it again. I mean, the states, and my comment about the states are that it was the states that came together and worked on this set of standards. I think in a lot of ways have been envisioned by our form of government, that states would work together. You mean you don't have to? I'll remind you that this is a voluntary adoption. Oklahoma does not have to adopt these standards. Other states don't have to adopt these standards. They could, and those who have already implemented them could pull out if they decide to do so. But I think that, I just think that it's part of, I've seen in other cases where, at least when I was in office, that states communicate and share ideas all the time anyway. We were a member, for example, of an organization called ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council, and they were a conservative think tank that our state was a part of, and we would go to these conferences and we would share ideas with other states. So in other areas. So I guess it's not unusual in my mind that states would share those ideas and maybe come up with a standard that we all, or at least some, if they choose to do so, would adopt. Ron, I want to, real quickly, I want to at least interject this. This is something that I found when I was looking at some of the Common Core standards, and just as an example. So I want everybody to be clear what some of the things that are being considered. related to these standards. These were some of the excerpts I found that were samples of what would be asked of students to know. And I'm going to read it here, just a couple. One, students delineate and evaluate the argument that Thomas Paine makes in Common Sense. By the way, my daughter's studying Thomas Paine's Common Sense and having to write a paper about it in Berryhill. They assess the reasoning present in his analysis, including the premises and purposes of his essay. That's pretty deep stuff to me. And for someone who appreciates Thomas Paine and being one of the founders of our country and some of our ideas, I think that's valuable for kids to be exposed to. And I think that it's valuable for them to have to write an essay about it and not just color in a bubble on a multiple choice test. Students analyze Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, identifying its purpose and evaluating rhetorical features such as the listing of grievances. That's good. That's good stuff. That's stuff I want my students to learn, my child to learn. And then on the math side, I found this: students determine the meaning of key terms such as hydraulic, trajectory, and torque. Again, pretty deep subject and pretty high standards in my mind.
Well, first of all, let me just answer that by saying we don't begin standards, I think, until 1868 in history. So I have no idea how they would be able to take Thomas Paine's Common Sense in the context of history that they haven't even studied. So you're talking about reading a document out of context where they have no idea or understanding of how the nation was formed in the first place and what happened and what went into the formation of the United States and how that was relevant in terms of the world, France, for example. So, and that was huge in terms of what what formulated Thomas Paine's mind and ideas about these things were the Revolution in France. So if you don't know anything about that because you're not even starting to study history until 1868, it really is literally out of context, number one. And number two, anybody could do that if the state weren't forcing us to do it. So I think, again, you're talking about, yes, there are good things in the standards. I'm not going to sit here and say no, but there's no reason to force us into doing those standards. And you say voluntarily, and I can appreciate that, but do you realize that the Common Core was a single paragraph in a 38-page bill that was about teacher incentive pay? So how is that really voluntarily? We passed them before they were even available to read. So how is that voluntarily? How do you voluntarily go to the doctor and say, I want to have an MRI, but I'm not really sure what I have yet. Let's just see what I can find, what you find on it. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about doing. So the voluntary aspect, I can appreciate what you're saying. You're saying the state didn't have to adopt them, and I completely understand. But when you have a whole bolus of money sitting out there from ERA funds, $500 billion of it, by the way, and we want to crack at that, well, for Pete's sakes, Oklahoma's going to go full steam ahead and go, sure, we'll take them. And yes, again, it's voluntary. But had that carrot not been on that stick, maybe we wouldn't have. We certainly did not discuss them at all before they were implemented, and there's no way we could have because they weren't even written to that point in time. So I'm sorry, I just had to make that statement.
All right, our last question, final question for the day.
My name's Kathy Miller from Skiatook. I moved to Oklahoma 17 years ago, and one of the first things I learned about and thought was absolutely brilliant after I understood it was the tag agencies here. I've lived in all sorts of different states that have DMVs, and I can tell you it's a nightmare. You have to make an appointment if you really don't want to sit there for 6 hours. And so when I saw the tag agencies, at first I thought, well, how in the world can they make this work? They have to handle a lot of money. There's license plates. There's legal things to do with that. And the more I learned and have experienced it, the more brilliant I've thought the idea is. So my point is, I know you gentlemen have stated that you're in favor of public education. I'm in favor of education. However, this state has shown that we can privatize things and be very successful, things that have legal implications and money. What about voucher system? Why wouldn't we can keep public education, offer vouchers, those who, if Common Core does go through, God forbid, then they can have the voucher to go to a private school and not have to deal with Common Core. So my question is, if you're so in favor of public schools, what about the voucher system? And that way there is truly more of a competitive nature in education, and we can see, I guess, let the best one win out.
You know, Oklahoma a couple of years ago passed the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship, which is a voucher system that works for special needs students. And so there is certainly that opportunity currently in the Oklahoma law related to special needs students. You know, related to vouchers in Oklahoma, I think it's a question that you would then ask related to supply and demand. This is not a community that has a parish school on every corner like a Milwaukee or a St. Louis or some other places. So, you know, to simply say vouchers would be the solution, you wouldn't currently have the supply of private schools that would currently even be in place if you were to shut down the system tomorrow. So it's certainly an interesting concept, but right now there's no infrastructure or support to even get to how you would be able to educate all of the kids in Tulsa Public as well as the state.
I just want to say, in the 12 years I served in the legislature, I don't know that I ever had anybody compliment our tag agencies, so that's good. That's good to hear. It's good to hear that we're doing something right. That's you know, in a way, as you were asking the question, I even though they're public schools, I mean, we do have a system where there is a certain amount of autonomy in our school districts, because they are individual bodies and they have boards that govern. In fact, they're seen as a sub-state, I believe is kind of the term. I think that's the right term. But they're autonomous in many ways, so they have the ability to you know, to do some things on their own. And I think that affords a lot of the public an opportunity to engage and be involved in your public schools through your school districts. The voucher question, I've always often wondered, I guess, if we had full vouchers, whether the Christian schools, for example, would want to accept a public voucher, because I've always been concerned that could ultimately lead to government interaction and intervention into some of our private Christian schools, and it seems like to me that would possibly open that up if you had a system of vouchers.
Yes, Dr. Piper.
I know you want to close, so I'll be brief, and I'll assume you've got the closing word or whatever you're going to do here. With regard to the voucher idea, be aware of the fact that what the representative has said here is a potential problem, unless it's made very, very clear that that's your money and it's not somehow a grant given to you. If it's a grant that's been given to you by the government, whether it be state or federal, then you are inviting the state or federal government into your decision-making process. When you get your Pell Grant, that is, in essence, it's a tax rebate back to you that you can use at will to go to whatever college you choose to go to. And therefore, Oklahoma Wesleyan University, for example, would not necessarily at this point, feel that we're in danger of being compromised by federal influence. However, my point and my energy for this debate, I don't distrust your motives. I think you guys really see a problem in the school system. You're trying to correct it. I sincerely believe that. And I agree, and I think all of us agree, that there is a problem in the school system. Students are underperforming, discipline is lacking, our culture is suffering consequences as a result of that. My fear is this. First of all, I'm a lifelong educator. I think I do a pretty good job, and I don't want somebody who's not an educator telling me what to do, because I'm pretty sure that when they do, it'll compromise rather than help my product. So, and I'm not trying to be pedantic on that at all. I'm just telling you what my heart is and responding what I think is sincerity on your part. Second, I do believe that freedom prevails in the long run. And I think that all of us enjoy the liberties we've been granted by God. And I think we should have the respect, especially from within a conservative context, to enjoy those liberties. And the thing that I enjoy most is the liberty and the freedom and the liberation to teach my kids what I want them to believe, the morality I want them to embrace, and the walk that I want them to have in life. And Common Core does have a risk of compromising my efforts to do that. It sincerely does. And that bothers me. Just last week, and I'll be quiet, the Homeschool Association at Texas was having their convention. And there was a group of protesters. You can Google this. This is real news. I'm not making it up or hyperbole here. There were a group of protesters outside the Texas Homeschool Convention, and they were carrying placards saying that what those homeschoolers were teaching their kids was immoral. That's the word they used. Now, what did the protesters find to be immoral? They said that it was immoral for parents to teach their children creationism. Now, that bothers me. I want to teach my kids that God created them. I want them to understand that. I think you guys do too. I'm not suggesting you do anything different, but Common Core compromises that effort to do so, even at Oklahoma Wesleyan University, because if it goes in play, I'll have to start complying with it too, because I'm preparing teachers to go into the public school system. So the trickle-down effect of Common Core actually even hits the parochial and the Christian school community. That's why it bothers me.
Do you want to? Go ahead.
Just to clarify, and Dr. Piper makes good points. The current Common Core adoption is for math and English. Oklahoma has not considered science or other subjects.
No, that's wrong. I'm sorry. Respectfully, Governor Henry created a proclamation. It was an executive order. I can actually give it to you. In 2010, when he was still in office, as he was leaving, as the Race to the Top Commission was meeting. That is actually on, you can go to the Department of Education website because it's actually recorded in school law. And it says that Oklahoma has, it doesn't even say will adopt. It says has. It did, meaning past tense, was adopted language arts, math, social studies, and science. So whatever we're being told is literally wrong, because unless we're going to consider that the school law is wrong, and that's great, I say we wipe it out and move forward. But that's exactly what it says in law. It was, and as a matter of fact, I can give you even more information so you can go look it up yourself. Look up Governor Henry addendum to Race to the Top. And that's what it was. It was an addendum to the Race to the Top where he put in law, in state law, all four of them. So yes, what Dr. Piper is saying is absolutely a huge concern to those of us who are literal believers of the Bible, as so am I, which is one reason I homeschool. I'm not going to tell the kids they descended from Aves. They were created as in the image of God, and that's what they were. So when you look at the science standards, that is antithetical to what they say in the science standards. So Dr. Piper is exactly correct. And when you look at the fact that homeschoolers use very small publishing companies for their materials, because most people don't want to do a traditional Thomas Jefferson education anymore. So you have to use very small publishers. Well, if you're a very small publisher and you're being swallowed literally by Pearson and McGraw-Hill, the two largest textbook manufacturers in the entire world, not just America, in the entire world, what do? You put out something saying, our new course is aligned with the Common Core state standards, because you're going to have to get market share. If you don't get market share, you perish. That's the free economy, correct? So I just was in Mardell several months ago. I get some of my kids' curriculum there, walked in the door, and there's a huge thing right in front of me, Common Core State Standards Aligned books, right there. So it is literally narrowing my opportunity for curriculum, good biblical curriculum, because of the fact that the larger publishing companies are not doing that, and there's a competition issue there. So yes, it's a big deal. Did you have one?
Well, I'm beating this horse to death, but Richard Dawkins has said that it's child abuse to inculcate faith in your kids. That's a quote out of The God Delusion. Christopher Hitchens says we are irreparably maiming our children by compulsory education in religion. That's in his seminal work, which was competing with Richard Dawkins. Richard Rorty, premier American philosopher that's taught at the Ivy League and several other schools, has gone on record saying, parents, we are going to go right on making your evangelical biblical worldview seem silly rather than desirable. The context for my concerns, and I'm guessing you find all of those statements deplorable. I'm guessing you'd like to protect your kids and your grandkids from that. But I know for a fact as an educator that the people that are leading the way within the educational establishment that are leading in the development of Common Core align themselves more with Hitchens and Rorty and Dawkins and Derrida and the crew than they do with me and probably with you. That concerns me. I would rather you have the freedom to teach your kids differently, and I would rather you not be labeled as a child abuser because you want to pass on faith to your kid, whether it be in the school or whether it be in homeschool or whether it be in the privacy of your home. And I think Common Core runs the risk of compromising that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. You guys have been very generous with your time. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you guys for being here all day, giving your time. I hope you found this very informative and effective. If you have not signed up on our newsletter, get on our newsletter so I can let you know when this is available on YouTube. And go and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much.